Good morning, church. It's good to be with you here this morning. It is a little cooler in Colorado where I've spent some time recently. And y'all, even in Cuba, I got back from Cuba Friday night. Cuba was easier than the temperatures here. I just want you to know. But I do want to say before I start preaching here, being in Cuba again, we had 4 ladies from our church did a conference for 60 women there, pastors' wives, missionaries. It was truly amazing. And I got to see again some things in Cuba that I've seen before and some things I had not seen that God is doing. And with that, I hear about some of the other trips that happened this summer, a couple to Cuba, India, Africa, South America, some things that have happened over in our Northwest Community Center. And I want you to know, church, I believe God has Northwest Bible Church here at this time to uniquely have conversations about Jesus all over the world, and not for us to make this the coolest, most wonderful place you could ever imagine. And I am just thrilled to be here. Can we just praise God? Now, I was in Cuba for a week. 2 days before I was in Cuba, I was in Colorado, 20 miles outside of Creed. And I went outside one morning to have some time with the Lord in this hammock, and I was kind of bundled up with a hat on because it was 39 degrees. I had a red hat on. I'm sitting there reading my Bible, and this hummingbird is like 6 inches from my face. And we had been watching the hummingbirds. Whenever we go there, we make the little sugar water and the hummingbird feeder. And y'all, there was just this moment, the best way I can describe it, it was just this moment of delight rising up in me, seeing this hummingbird 6 inches from my face. And what also came up in me was this desire or longing to capture it. And so I made a move to pull out my cell phone and capture it with a picture. And you know what happened as soon as I moved, right? Bzz. And the hummingbird was gone. And I've been just chewing on that idea because really for the last 3 months, I've really been trying to think about this thing we say here, unexpected joy. And what are we really trying to communicate? What are we really trying to expect from God? And as I thought about that hummingbird and this little delight and moment of longing that was rising up in me, I thought, that's it. That's actually what the theologians talk about when they talk about joy. A longing that you somehow want to capture. You know what? Y'all, you know, you're taking pictures like more than ever before. We're taking pictures of our vacations, and we are told that we actually enjoy them less because we're trying to spend so much time trying to capture the thing, and it's slipping through our fingers. And there is something about this idea of joy that the moment we try to capture it, it's gone, right? You know, it's interesting. I got the first time back here in a while. I was visiting with 3 different friends here who all have been sending kids off to college. And one guy came in and said, how you doing today, brother? I'm really sad. A little tear coming down his eye because his first time coming to church without his daughter. And I remembered that feeling, the first meal. Because there's the thing right there. And I want to say something just to chew on a little bit here, that moment, even the tear, was actually an invitation into joy, a longing for something. And maybe even that desire to say, I'm going to always have my family with me, is about a longing for a greater place, a greater family, a greater joy. You know, the psalmist said what? 16:11, in his presence is what? Fullness of joy. In his presence It's the tricky thing about joy. You can't program it, you can't capture it. And somehow it comes in this sometimes crazy, sometimes confusing, sometimes wonderful journey of living a life of desperate dependence on Jesus. So I want you to turn with me this morning to Psalm 63. And we're going to look at David's journey into unexpected joy. And we're just gonna see what comes out from the text, what we can learn as we just study David's own, I'm gonna say, testimony. Now, in Psalm 63, I want you to know that you really can't appreciate some of these things David says about, my soul sings for joy, I'm satisfied as with marrow and fatness, without understanding the context of this particular psalm. You know, not every psalm do we know what spurred David or the other psalmists to write the psalm, but this particular one, we have a pretty good idea. So before I talk about longing and God's love and joy and confidence that you see in this psalm as we walk through it, longing, love, joy, confidence, I want to talk about the setting of this psalm. You'll see in Psalm 63, if you have your Bible, it says, there's a little title, it says, a Psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. I want you to know that's actually in the Hebrew text. That God intended for that to be part of the divine word of God, even though it's not part of the poem per se. That God wanted it for some of you here today. Because I want you to know, that lets us know David's going through a really hard time. And yet he's talking about joy. He's actually not asking God for anything here. Some people have said this is like one of David's psalms, best psalms on praise and adoration. And David's worst moment brings out his best. Here's a picture of the wilderness of Judah. That looks like my yard. I came home and gosh. The wilderness of Judah. When was David in the wilderness of Judah? Go down to verse 9 and you get a little idea of the context. It says, but those who seek my life to destroy it, they will go into the depths of the earth. Those who seek my life. So we're talking about unexpected joy, but I want you to know David's in a place where somebody is seeking to destroy his life and he's hiding out in the wilderness of Judah. We know that there was a time when a son that David really loved, his name was Absalom. Absalom pulled off a successful coup. And he went in and he took over David's throne. He took most of his servants. He took all of the women that were part of David's court. And he decided, I'm going to kill my father. And I will not be satisfied until the man after God's own heart is dead. I will not be satisfied until God's anointed, the king, is dead. That's the context of this psalm. And so wherever you're at today, I want you to know God holds out the possibility for you of this thing we call unexpected joy. In fact, it was interesting to me to hear some of the really brief testimonies on that video about, in this difficult time, here's what I experienced. So here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna walk through this psalm, knowing that joy is not something we can capture or program, but it's something we experience in this crazy, wonderful journey of desperate dependence on Jesus. We're gonna talk about, again, longing, the love of God, joy, and confidence, okay? So the first thing we're gonna deal with here, and I'm gonna call it uninvited longings. uninvited longings. A child who is medically dependent, maybe a physical problem, some other kind of thing, uninvited longings. And what you see, these uninvited longings do two things for David. One is it makes him aware of his desires and really makes him aware of his ultimate desire. Look at verse 1. David says, "O God, you are my God. I shall seek you earnestly. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh yearns for you." O God, you are my God. When David is in the desert, when everything is stripped away, when somebody else is on his throne, here's the longing right now that ultimately comes up for David, that he is aware of his ultimate desire. God, you're my God. And it is that simple statement of faith that his whole relationship is based on. God, you are my God. And I just want to ask you, wherever you are today, whether it feels like 111 degrees in your life or 39 degrees or something in between, is that the faith, affirmation that is driving all of you. God, you are my God. And it's interesting, David says, I shall seek you earnestly. You know what that word earnestly? It actually comes from a word that means sunrise. I'm gonna seek you before everything else, because these uninvited longings, this sense of, wow, I want something here I can't seem to capture. It actually causes an ache in my soul, and I want it. And so it brings me to you in a way that says, before anything else, I'm running to you. Before food, before the news, whatever. God, I'm gonna seek you earnestly. And watch what he says. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh yearns for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Now, I don't even want to go outside right now. My yard, it is a mess. And there's some things that need cleaned up, cut, whatever. I'm not even gonna go out there. And David says, this longing and desire for God is every bit as real as going outside this afternoon and having a picnic in 111 degree heat. I'm glad y'all are gonna join us. It's every bit as real as being thirsty to the point of death. And it's every bit as real as being so hungry. I can't think of anything else. David says, my soul thirsts for you. My flesh yearns for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. And I wanna say to you today that when you have the longing for whatever it is, the better you fill in the blank, whatever it is, you know what? That longing actually might be pointing you to be able to say, oh yeah, God, you're my God. And that longing is making you aware of your greatest need. And you know what else those longings do for us? It becomes the opportunity to become aware of how we fulfill them in ways that do not satisfy, right? I want to show you something I brought here today. This is Mogu Mogu. How many here know what Mogu Mogu is? Anybody? Well, Andrew, yes. Oh, we have some people over here. So Andrew and Veronica introduced me just a year ago to Mogu Mogu. Didn't even know what it was before. Mogu Mogu means choo choo. Okay, so on this, this says 25% lychee juice with nata de coco. Now, this nata de coco it's got these lychees is a fruit. Nata de coco is these little chunks of things in here, coconut, like jellies that when you drink it, things are popping in your mouth that you can chew on. Y'all are thinking, man, this is really weird. But I will tell you, we had about 30 people over, people from all over the world for Thanksgiving, I think it was. And Andrew and Veronica bring this gift of Mogu Mogu. They brought it in little 8 ounce in a 6-pack. So when nobody was looking, I took a sip of one. I thought, this is so good. So I took the rest of the six-pack and I hid it on top of the refrigerator. My granddaughter and I, we have fights over Mogu Mogu. Now, all of a sudden, man, I'm like loving this Mogu Mogu, and every time Andrew goes to the Asian grocery store, he calls me to say, hey, do you want me to pick you up some Mogu Mogu? I say, yeah, get me 2 six-packs, please. Now, right before, just about a couple months ago, Vila saw me drinking some Mogu Mogu, and she said, Neil, I'm so surprised you're so into this Mogu Mogu. And I'm like, Vila, it is so refreshing. And she says, she's looking at it. I got an 8-ounce bottle. She says, do you know how much sugar is in this? She says, there's more sugar in this than there is in a 12-ounce Coke. She told me that because she knows I pride myself on not drinking Cokes because they have so much sugar. And so I come home from a bike ride, and I think, I'm so thirsty. Where's the Mogu Mogu? Did Zuri drink my last Mogu Mogu? And I drink my Mogu Mogu, but everybody here knows, probably what would be better for me than when I came home from the bike ride than a Mogu Mogu would be water, or maybe some vegetables, or a protein shake. But you know what? I don't want any of it because I've already satisfied my desire with Mogu Mogu. And David, he's getting clear on his ultimate desires here when he says, God, you're my God. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh yearns for you. And I want to ask us in all seriousness this morning, church, do you know what your Mogu Mogu is? Chew, chew. Do you know what you're chewing on? Do you know what your Mogu go-to is? And before I press you on this a little bit, what's on the line here is your joy. So I want to say, Mogu Mogu is not necessarily bad. And the thing that might be the thing that could be suppressing your appetite for joy could be a good thing, right? Mogu Mogu is not necessarily bad, but if I have to have it at every meal, if it becomes the core of my diet, and that's all I ever do is drink Mogu Mogu, I got a problem, right? And so, I'm thinking David lost a lot of relationships. And sometimes it's a relationship, right? I gotta have this relationship, or why don't I have a relationship? And I know it's hard for me to even bring that up for some of you. But I wanna remind you, David's in the desert. He thinks he's gonna die. And it might be a really good thing, like work or what. Why isn't this better for me? Just, before you leave, just be clear, right? Before you give up on somebody, let's just be clear. How am I gonna satisfy my joy here? Speaking of the core of our diet, most of the time the core of our diet is where? It's right here. Spiritually speaking, it's in our head and heart, right? And this is why this is so important. It's not simply that I want to stay away from things because they're bad. We can all agree pornography is a problem, okay? But I don't want Mogu Mogu to be the core of my diet because I don't want to fill myself with that which will never satisfy. Because in his presence is fullness of joy. It's about running to something better. It's making you aware of your longings. And so David, he's in a place of longing. And it ultimately takes him to the foundation of his whole life. Uninvited longing takes him to this place of thinking about God's undeserved love for him. Here's why I say this. Psalm 63, verse 3. Because your loving kindness is better than what, church? Life. It's better than life because your loving kindness is better than life. My lips are gonna praise you. Now, let me just do a little review here. About a year and a half ago, we did a series on a Hebrew word called chesed. That's the word loving kindness there. We said that word shows up 250 times in your Old Testament. Pretty important. Your loving kindness is better than life. We said that word is trying to describe this infinitely complex love of God. We said that word, there's a guy, Michael Card, who was a musician and a theologian. He had a definition for this. When the person from whom I had the right to expect nothing gives me everything. When David is dealing with his uninvited longings, it drives him to this truth. Oh yeah, the person, God, who I had the right to expect nothing, gave me everything. Because here, David's just thinking about his life story. He's thinking about the story of, I had a great-great-grandfather. His name was Abraham. And God came to Abraham. Abraham didn't do anything special. Abraham didn't jump through any hoops. God just came to Abraham and said, I love you because I love you. And I will keep loving you because I love you. This is how amazing God's hesed is. David's thinking, oh yeah, God, there was that time where God came to Abraham and Abraham's struggling about his own mogus and am I gonna have any kids? And God that day made a covenant with Abraham. And in those days, here's how you would make a covenant. You'd take an animal and you'd cut it in half. And then you and the person you were making a covenant with would walk through that middle of that animal that particular day. Abraham did not walk through the animal, only God did. And it was God's way of saying this, Abraham and all your descendants after you, I want you to know I'm gonna love you because I love you. And even if you blow it, even if you mess up, I'll do whatever I have to do to love you, even if it means me being destroyed. See, David, when he says God's loving kindness is better than life, oh yeah, that's the only reason I'm here on this planet. And David thought, oh yeah, and that's the only reason I'm a king, because there was a day when a prophet came to David's house. And that prophet came and said, hey, God's looking for a king for Israel. And David wasn't even in the room. All the older brothers were there. And everybody would have picked son number one. The prophet said no. Finally, the prophet says, is there not another kid around here? And they go get David. You're gonna be the king. I love you because I love you. I'm gonna make you a king. I love you because I love you. And some of you need to hear this today. Sometimes that uninvited longing, that place of what sometimes feels like pain in your life, is there because you brought it on yourself. And I want you to know, David actually had a part in the problem he was facing. Because David, the man over God's own heart, the one God loved him because he loved him, there was a time when all the other kings were going out to war and David did not go. And when he was sitting at home, he saw Bathsheba and he took her. She was the wife of one of his very best, most loyal friends, Uriah the Hittite. He gets her pregnant. He kills Uriah the Hittite. And God says this, David, I love you because I love you. I'm not giving up on you because I made a promise and a covenant with you and your forefathers. I love you because I love you, but the sword will not depart from your house. Do you understand? That part of what's happening here is because of David's sin, and yet he understands I'm still even around because of God's hesed. And I want us to be clear, church, today, that we're here because God loves us because he loves us. I was so happy we sang that song, Oh, How He Loves Us All. I didn't know we were gonna sing it. I was so excited. I was just praying, God, help us to believe this. Help us to look at that cross, that messy cross, and help us understand that we get to see God's Hesed in a way that David didn't even get to see it. That we got to see God's Hesed in a way that Abraham just got a little glimpse of it when God walked through that animal to say, make this, if this has to happen to me to keep me in relationship with you, let it be. And that's what happened to Jesus on the cross, so that you could be in relationship with him, so that you could ultimately be kings and queens in his kingdom. And I want you to know, none of us here, not one person here has a shot at the joy that is talked about in the Bible without, in some way, being able to say, oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. He is actually jealous for me. We are his portion, and he is our prize. Uninvited longing that brings David to the foundation of undeserved love that brings him to this place of unexpected joy. So David says, because your loving kindness is better life, my lips will praise you. Verse 4, I will bless you as long as I live. I will lift up my hands in your name. Verse 5, my soul is satisfied as with marrow and fatness. My mouth offers praises to you with joyful lips. Here's what's fascinating, y'all. Marrow and fatness. In the Old Testament, that's a picture of fullness. Absalom and all David's old buddies are over there on the throne drinking all David's mogu. And David says, in the desert, I feel full. I feel satisfied. My circumstances aren't going how I want. And he's singing about joy. Now, I said we can't program unexpected joy. We can't make it happen. It feels more like a longing than anything else. And once we try to grab it, it's gone. But I do want to tell you a couple things that are part of lighting the fires of joy in our heart. The first is this, David talks about, is praise. Praise jumpstarts joy and it intensifies joy. David says, I'll praise you. I sing praise. Now, church, David said in verse 2, I've seen you in the sanctuary to see your power and glory. I want you to know something. In the Old Testament, the word sanctuary was the place where God's people gathered as a community. And this is so important today, church, because in our individualistic society, we almost downplay this too much. Even the word praise in the Old Testament, it's really not how we use it. I often will say, I'm having my little time by myself with the Lord. I'm praising God for who he is, what he has done, and that is really good. But for the most part, in the Psalms, praise is talking about what happens when God's people are gathered and what is coming out of our mouth, the song that we sing. So I want to press us on this. Some of you know, it's football season's coming. Some of you know I went to Louisiana State University, right? And I'm part of a group of people that, you know, when LSU scores a touchdown, which they'll probably score a lot this year, when LSU scores a touchdown, I want to tell you what happens. The band starts playing, the music starts, and we start singing a little song that goes like this. Go Tigers, G-E-A-U-X. Now, I didn't say we knew how to spell, okay? But we start singing this song because somehow it's intensifying our praise, right? Our joy is coming out. Now, I want to just press you a little more on this. I know you've heard me say that before. I have a lot of friends here in the last 27 years that I have made who really like the colors maroon and white. And what's the school? Dang it, I'm having a brain freeze. What's the name of that school? Oh, Texas A&M, yeah. So I have a lot of Texas A&M friends over the last 27 years, and there's been a lot of times LSU has beaten, LSU and Texas A&M have played. Now, I want to tell you what has never happened in 27 years. Not one time when all my friends are gathering to watch LSU and Texas A&M play, they've never invited me. Not one time. I've never been invited, John Gadisa, okay? Not to point anybody out. My feelings are kind of hurt. But I know why they haven't invited me. Because here's what would happen. Y'all, if I went to this little A&M parties y'all have and LSU was playing, if by some very small chance of a miracle, A&M made a last-second touchdown and beat A&M, or if A&M made a last-second touchdown and beat LSU, you know what would happen? You guys would look at me, and I'd look at you, and we'd have this big awkward moment. And actually, your joy would be choked because you would hesitate and you would not, as loudly as possible, say what? See, y'all, at least LSU says something that makes sense. We might not have said it right. But you would what? You would choke your joy. And you know what's happening, church? We're often choking our joy. And we're holding back. And we're holding back on the praise, I mean the literal praise singing of God. We have a vision here. Having conversations about Jesus. I'm telling you, I had some very fun conversations about Jesus in Cuba and people who ended up in a car with me, and unfortunately they had to listen to some things. I had some very fun conversations when I was in Colorado, and you know, I was thinking I described them as fun. And sometimes we feel a little uncomfortable about having these conversations, but I want to tell you something. God made you to want to sing and talk about your mogu, the thing you chew on, the thing that is your mogu go-to. That some of you actually are choking your joy even when you feel resistant to having conversations about Jesus, okay? Praise, it helps activate and intensify our joy. Now, let me give you one more thing about what helps activate and intensify your joy. Meditation. I want you to see this verse here where David says in verse 6, when I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. You know why I didn't want to miss that verse, guys? Because here's the deal. If your uninvited longing is happening because of a difficult situation in your life, you know, sometimes you can get through the day by being really busy, very, very busy, drinking lots of mogu, doing whatever you do, but then night comes. And it all starts flooding on you, right? You get a call you don't want to get, and you can kind of ignore it as you're busy during your day, but then night comes. And David says, I've got this practice I've already been working on. When I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. I think about your loving kindness. I think about what you've done in the past. You go to Jesus. Oh yeah, Jesus, I think about when I'm eating a piece of bread, you said I'm the bread of life. Oh yeah, Jesus, I think about when I see the sun in the morning, I think about you said you're the light of the world. I think about how good you are. I think about your affections for me. Oh, how he loves us. And you need it. You need to have an intentional space where you have decided, I make room to meditate on who God is. You might do it in a hammock in 39-degree weather in Colorado. You might do it on a walk. You might do it driving. And you know why I mention this one? Because I understand there are some people here today who it would be easy for you to write off this message. Oh, there goes Neil again. He's kind of touchy-feely and singing ain't my deal and all of that. I want to tell you, you guys know the name Jonathan Edwards? You know the name Charles Spurgeon? These guys were intellectual giants. Their sermons were 3 times longer than my sermons. They spent tons of time meditating and studying on God as he revealed himself in this word. And you know, when you read their stories, you hear stories like this. Both of these guys, one day, I was meditating on God himself, and the love of God came on me so strong, it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was weeping, and I had to say, God, I'm not sure I can take much more of this. That was those kind of guys. Meditating doesn't guarantee that in 1 minute or 1 day or 1 month or 1 year, you're gonna go from the bottom to the top. However, this is David's testimony so that you would try God on this. Uninvited longing that makes us aware of our desires and how we seek to fulfill them. Undeserved love, the foundation, oh, how he loves us all. Unexpected joy that is intensified by your praise and your meditation. And for David, in this one, this is so beautiful. It leads to really unusual confidence in the middle of what he's going through. David says in verse 7, you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. Here's David, confident in God like a mother bird. Birds are fragile. I was reading a psalm yesterday, and the psalmist was describing the fragility of his life in terms of being a bird. Here, David says, I feel confident that I'm protected, but not only that I'm protected, that I have a future. Look at verse 9. Those who seek my life to destroy it will go into the depths of the earth. And then verse 11. But the king will rejoice in God. And commentators love to talk about this. David here, who's in the desert, Absalom sitting on his throne, drinking his mogu mogu. And at this point, David says, the king, I'm the king. That is my identity. God said, you're gonna be a king, and there's gonna be one from your line who's gonna be a king forever. God said, David, I guarantee you, you have a future. And David gets locked back in to that identity as he is experiencing the joy of God. And I just wanna remind you, church, this is why you wanna be in this journey. The uninvited longings, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, that you let them drive you to your greatest desire. Oh, your loving kindness is better than life, your undeserved love. And in that place of joy, it wasn't David saying, I've got to drum up some confidence. It was out of that, in that place of joy, David says, the king, I can see myself back on the throne one day. I can see every one of you. God sees every one of you as on and in and around the throne room one day. That is your destiny. And so, I want to close by giving you a little prayer. A few months ago, I just started looking at the Psalms, trying to understand this idea of joy. And I ran across this prayer in Psalm 21, where David says this, if we can put it up on the screen, because I want everybody to see it. Make me joyful with gladness in your presence. This is not you trying to capture the hummingbird. This is saying, God, I want this gift from you. Can you say that with me right now? Make me joyful with gladness in your presence. Now let's stand. And before I dismiss you, I want you to know that Andrew and Veronica are gonna introduce all of us to Mogu Mogu. They have a little table set up outside where you can get you a little cup of Mogu Mogu. And I feel like I guess I didn't warn people good enough first hour because they were freaking out about these little jellies you chew on. You're gonna chew on something when you drink it. And let me say, when you drink it and you say, oh, it's so refreshing, but then it doesn't change your life. It doesn't give you great confidence. And it just gives your kids a sugar high that then they're gonna be miserable at lunch. You know what you do? You just say, oh yeah, that's all of life. God, I need you to make me joyful with gladness in your presence. And so here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna praise God here to activate our joy in him. Can we just pray that one final time? Let's say it. Make me joyful with gladness in your presence.